The woman sitting across from me had kind eyes, the kind that crinkle at the corners when she smiles. She wasn't smiling now. She was my accountant. I'd been seeing her every April for 6 years, ever since my husband said she was the best in the county, and we should never go anywhere else. Her name was Beverly, and she had a small office above a dry cleaner's on Route 9, and she always kept a bowl of those wrapped butterscotch candies on the edge of her desk. I used to take 2 on the way out, a little ritual. That February, she had called me herself. Not her assistant. Her. She said she needed me to come in, and she said it in a voice I didn't recognize. Careful, like she was choosing each word before she let it out. She said not to mention it to my husband. She said to come alone. I remember sitting in the parking lot for 4 minutes before I went inside. I counted. I told myself it was probably nothing. A missing form. A correction. Something boring and fixable that she just wanted to explain in person. I told myself that all the way up the stairs. Her door was already open. She stood up when she saw me, which she'd never done before. She shook my hand like we were meeting for the first time. Then she sat down, folded her hands on the desk, and looked at me for a long moment before she said anything. "How much do you know," she said, "about your joint accounts?" I thought I knew everything. We'd been married for 9 years. My husband and I shared a checking account, a savings account, a joint brokerage account we'd opened right after the wedding because he said that was what responsible people did. I managed our day-to-day spending. He handled the investments. That was the arrangement. That was always the arrangement. I handle our household accounts, I told her. He handles the rest. She nodded slowly. Then she turned her monitor toward me. I leaned forward. At first I thought I was reading it wrong. The way you read a word so many times, it stops looking like a word. But I kept reading and nothing changed. There were transfers, dozens of them going back almost 3 years. Small ones at first, 400 here, 600 there. Amounts that would barely register in a month where the mortgage and the utilities and the groceries all hit at once. Then bigger. Then very big. All going to an account I had never seen before. "Is that account in his name?" I heard myself ask. "It's in a business name," Beverly said. "An LLC registered in Delaware. He's the sole member." I sat back. I'm not sure how long I sat there. Beverly didn't push me to say anything. She just waited, with her hands still folded on the desk, and I noticed that the butterscotch bowl was gone. She'd moved it to the windowsill. I don't know why I noticed that. "How much?" I finally said. She told me. I had to ask her to say it again. $240,000 over 31 months. Moved in pieces small enough not to trigger automatic flags, structured just carefully enough to suggest that someone had done their homework, someone who knew what they were doing. My husband was a financial advisor. He'd been one for 14 years. He absolutely knew what he was doing. I drove home on autopilot. I don't remember the turns. I remember pulling into our driveway and sitting in the car for a long time, staring at the house, the white shutters he picked out, the flower beds I'd planted the first spring we lived there, the basketball hoop in the driveway that we'd bought for nephews who visited twice a year. All of it so ordinary, all of it arranged just right. My husband's name was Scott. I'd met him at a work conference in Chicago. I was 26, just starting out in my career, still figuring out what I wanted. He was 30, confident in a way that felt safe rather than arrogant. He asked good questions. He remembered things I'd said. He called when he said he would. We got married 4 years later, on a Saturday in October. My mother cried. His mother cried. I was the happiest I'd ever been. 9 years is a long time to know someone, or to think you do. When he got home that evening, I was in the kitchen. I had made dinner because I always made dinner on Tuesdays, and I thought if I changed anything, if I did one thing differently, he would notice something was off. He had a habit of noticing things. He'd always said it was one of the things that made him good at his job, the ability to read a room, to pick up on signals other people missed. So I made pasta. I set the table. I asked him how his day was. He said fine. He poured himself a glass of wine and talked about a client who was being difficult about rebalancing his portfolio. I made the right sounds. I passed the bread. I watched his hands move when he talked, the same hands I'd held in a hospital waiting room when his father was sick, the same hands that had reached for mine across the table on our first anniversary. I thought about $240,000. That night, I lay awake next to him and made myself breathe slowly, evenly, the way you're supposed to when you're asleep. My mind was moving very fast, and my body was completely still, and I thought, I can't panic. I can't confront him yet. If I do, he'll move whatever is left, and I'll have nothing. I knew that much. I wasn't sure what I knew beyond that. The next morning, after he left for work, I called Beverly back. I need to understand exactly what I'm looking at, I said, and I need to know what I can do. She walked me through it again, slower this time. The transfers had started about 3 months after I'd had a miscarriage. We'd tried for a year and a half to get pregnant, and when I lost the pregnancy, something shifted between us. Not dramatically, not in any way I could have pointed to and named, but it was there. A distance. I had told myself it was grief. I had told myself we'd find our way back. Apparently, he had made other plans. Beverly told me she had already, quietly, reached out to a contact of hers, a forensic accountant. She said she'd done it the moment she found the LLC. Before she even called me, she said she wasn't sure it was her place, but she'd done it anyway because she'd been doing my taxes long enough to know that the money in our brokerage account had come from my inheritance, from my grandmother, who had left it to me specifically, not to us, and she felt I deserved to know what she knew. I don't know if I'd ever felt so grateful for a person I'd been seeing once a year for 6 years. The forensic accountant's name was Harold. He was retired FBI, which I didn't know was something that existed outside of television. He was in his 60s, unhurried, and he spoke about financial fraud the way a mechanic talks about engine trouble, matter of fact, almost gentle, like it's a shame, but it happens, and here's what we do about it. He asked me a lot of questions. He asked about life insurance policies. He asked whether I had any health issues he should know about. He asked whether my husband had ever tried to change the beneficiary on anything without telling me. That last question made me go very still. "Why are you asking me that?" I said. Harold looked at me steadily. "Because the money has to be going somewhere with a purpose," he said. "Sometimes the purpose is simple. Someone has another family, another life they're financing. But sometimes the picture is more complicated than that." I asked him what he meant by complicated. He told me that, in his experience, when a spouse moves significant assets over a long period of time, quietly and systematically, there are usually 2 scenarios. The first is that they're building a life they plan to escape to. The second is that they're building a case for something else. "What kind of something else?" I said. He didn't answer directly. He just said he'd like to pull the insurance documents if I could get him access. That night, I went through the filing cabinet in the home office while my husband was at the gym. We had a whole drawer just for insurance. I put everything in there over the years: car insurance, homeowner's policy, the folder from when we'd replaced the roof, dental. I knew that drawer. I thought I knew every folder in it. In the back, behind the car insurance renewal notices, was a folder I didn't recognize. The label on it was just a date. A date from about 2 years ago. Inside was a life insurance policy I had never seen. My name was on it as the insured. The death benefit was $800,000. The beneficiary listed was not my husband. It was an LLC. A different LLC than the one Beverly had found. Same state of registration, different name. I took pictures of every page. I put the folder back exactly where I'd found it. I closed the drawer. I sat down in his desk chair and I stared at the wall for a long time. I want to tell you that I cried. I think that would make more sense looking back. But I didn't. Something had gone very cold inside me. And in place of sadness, there was something much simpler: clarity. He wasn't building a second life to run away to. He was building something else entirely. I called Harold at 7 in the morning. He picked up on the second ring. When I described what I'd found, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think it's time we brought in someone else." The someone else was a woman. She was with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. She had a last name I couldn't have spelled, and a way of sitting very straight in her chair that made me feel like I should sit up straighter too. She came to Beverly's office, not mine or hers, and she brought a colleague who didn't say much and took notes on a laptop. They asked me questions for almost 2 hours. They were careful and precise. They already knew things. Things about the LLC structure, about the timing of the transfers, about my husband's business accounts. They'd had their eye on some of this before Beverly ever called me. What they hadn't had was the insurance policy. The agent, I'll call her Agent Marquez, which is close enough to her real name, told me that what I'd found was significant. She explained it in plain language, which I appreciated. Scott had structured the policy so that if something happened to me, the death benefit would go directly to the LLC, which he controlled. Combined with the asset transfers over the past 3 years, the picture was what she called suggestive of intent. She didn't use the word murder, but I heard it anyway, sitting right underneath the words she did use, quiet and terrible. She asked me if I was willing to cooperate. I said yes before she finished the sentence. What followed was 6 weeks of something I can only describe as living inside 2 realities at once. In one reality, I was my husband's wife. I came home, I made dinner, I asked about his clients, about his day, about whether we should replace the gutters this spring like we'd been talking about. I laughed at his jokes. I slept next to him. I let him kiss me goodbye in the morning. In the other reality, I was working with federal investigators to document everything. Beverly had frozen copies of all our joint account records. Harold had traced the money flow through both LLCs. Agent Marquez's team had confirmed that one of the LLCs had a holding account that was actively receiving funds and had been used to purchase a property in North Carolina, a property in a beach town, modest by beach standards but paid for in full, that I had never heard of. My husband had a house in a state I'd never visited, that he'd bought with money he'd taken from our accounts, which he'd taken from my inheritance, which my grandmother had left me when I was 23, because she said she wanted me to have a foundation. He had a house, and he had an insurance policy, and he had, Agent Marquez told me, a search history that her team found deeply concerning. She didn't tell me what was in it. She said she'd rather I not know specifics, for my own sake. She said the important thing was that they had what they needed. The day it happened, I was not home. That had been arranged. I was at my sister's place 3 hours away, supposedly visiting for a long weekend. My sister knew something was wrong. I'd had to tell her something, but not the details. I told her I needed to be away from home for a few days, and I needed her not to ask too many questions. She's always been good at that. I was sitting on her back porch with a cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. It was a number I'd saved under Beverly's name, so Scott would never question it if he saw it, but it wasn't Beverly calling, it was Agent Marquez. She said it's done. He's in custody. I put the phone down on the armrest. My sister had come to stand in the doorway, and she was watching me, and when she saw my face, she came over and sat beside me without saying a word. We sat there for a long time. Scott was arrested at his office mid-morning between client appointments. He was charged with wire fraud, money laundering, and what Agent Marquez later described to me as conspiracy to commit, which is the formal way of saying that the search history and the insurance policy and the property in North Carolina added up to something a prosecutor could stand in front of a jury with. He denied everything at first. Then, when they showed him what they had, he tried to make a deal. He said the insurance policy was a mistake, a misunderstanding, that he'd been meaning to update the beneficiary. He said the LLCs were for a business venture he'd been planning as a surprise. He had an explanation for everything, delivered in the smooth, confident voice I'd listened to for 9 years, the voice that had always made me feel like everything was going to be fine. The prosecutor was not moved. His attorney advised him to accept the plea agreement. He took it. 18 years. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. I got the house, which I sold. I got the remaining joint assets, what was left of them. The property in North Carolina was seized. The proceeds from its sale went toward restitution. I will probably never see most of what he took. My grandmother's money, the foundation she wanted me to have. A lot of it is gone. But here's what didn't happen. I'm still here. That sounds like a small thing, until you think about what it means. Until you go through Beverly's office in your head and think about what would have happened if she'd just filed the return and said nothing. If she'd decided it wasn't her place. If I'd never pulled that folder from the back of the filing cabinet. I think about what he must have been planning. I try not to, but I do. I try to remember the version of him I thought I knew. The man at the conference with the good questions. The man who called when he said he would. I try to figure out where that person ended and the person who bought a house in North Carolina and took out an $800,000 policy on my life began. I can't find the line. Maybe there was never a line. Maybe I was just looking at him from a very particular angle for a very long time. I live in Portland now. I rent an apartment on the east side with big windows and a small balcony where I can see the hills on clear mornings. I have a job I didn't have before. I went back to school, got a certification I'd always thought about getting, and now I do something I actually want to do. I have a savings account that is only mine. I have an attorney who helped me understand what financial independence actually looks like when you build it yourself, from the ground up, with no one else's hands in it. I still see Beverly every April. She still has the butterscotch candies on her desk. Last year, she'd moved them back to the spot I remembered, and when I left, I took two. Some rituals you keep, some you burn to the ground and start over. I chose both. I keep coming back to the butterscotch candies. Of all the things to hold on to, the folder in the back of the filing cabinet, the number Beverly said twice because I needed to hear it twice, the way Agent Marquez sat so straight in her chair. What stays with me most is that Beverly moved the candy dish before I arrived, like she already knew the conversation we were about to have wasn't that kind of visit. She didn't have to call me. That's the part I turn over and over. She could have filed the return, sent me the summary, and told herself it wasn't her place. A lot of people would have. A lot of people do. But Beverly had enough integrity to understand that staying quiet in that moment was its own kind of choice, and she wasn't willing to make it. That's not a small thing. That's the kind of moral backbone most people only think they have until the moment actually arrives. I used to think I was a careful person. I paid attention to things. I noticed when something fell off. But I had handed over an entire part of my financial life to someone I trusted and never looked closely enough to see what was happening inside it. That wasn't laziness. I think I just believed that love was a sufficient reason not to look. It isn't. Love is not a financial strategy. Trust is not a substitute for knowing where your money is and what your name is signed to. I learned that the hard way, and I don't say it to be cynical. I say it because I wish someone had told me earlier, plainly, the way Beverly eventually did. What Harold taught me, quietly, over several weeks, in that unhurried way of his, was that the truth is almost always in the details that don't quite add up. The amount that seems slightly too small to question, the folder that doesn't have a label you recognize, the date on a document that's just a little off from what you'd expect. Smart people, he told me, count on you not looking. They count on your goodwill being bigger than your curiosity. The moment you decide to look anyway, clearly, without flinching, is the moment the whole structure starts to come apart. The hardest part wasn't the investigation. It wasn't even sitting across the dinner table from Scott for 6 weeks, watching him pour wine and talk about his clients while I smiled and passed the bread. The hardest part was deciding, in Beverly's office, with my hands in my lap and a number I couldn't process in my head, that I was going to hold myself together long enough to do what needed to be done. That I wasn't going to fall apart yet, that I could save the falling apart for later when it was safe. That kind of endurance isn't dramatic. It doesn't look like anything from the outside. It's just a woman driving home on autopilot, sitting in her driveway, and deciding to get out of the car. I got out of the car. I'm still getting out of the car every day in ways that are smaller but feel just as deliberate, building something that is only mine, making decisions that don't require anyone else's signature, trusting myself in the quiet way you have to learn to do when the person you trusted most turns out to have been someone else entirely. Portland mornings are cold and clear. I watch the hills from my balcony, and I drink my coffee, and I think about Beverly and Harold and the version of myself who had the sense to stay calm long enough to let the truth do what truth eventually does. It holds, even when everything else doesn't.